on to the main story of the day. Yesterday, Mr. Bates took on the Post Office yet again when he appeared at the public inquiry. Now, in case you've been under a rock, this is Alan Bates, a sub-postmaster sucked into the scandal of Post Office software wrongly totting up the day's takings, which led to the wrongful prosecution of thousands of people for theft and fraud when the Post Office bosses knew apparently all along all those cases were unsafe. We've got a short clip of him at the inquiry yesterday, and here it is.
They're an atrocious organisation. They need disbanding, it needs removing, it needs building up again from the ground floor. And as I've been quoted quite commonly, the whole of the postal service nowadays, it's a dead duck. It's beyond saving, and to be quite fair, it needs to be sold to someone like Amazon. It needs a real big injection of money, and I think that can only happen coming in from outside. Otherwise, it's just going to be a bugbear for the government for the years to come.
Now, it's been pretty excoriating, it would seem, at least about the Post Office and its likelihood of surviving, never mind what it did to sub-postmasters. Now, Mr. Bates there set up a campaign group, and his leadership was lionised by an ITV drama, which made him the focus of the fight for justice. Lizzie, this was his chance, 23 years after the scandal started, to really land one on the Post Office and apportion blame for what they had done. Did he do that?
Yeah, I think it had obviously been a long time coming, and the significance of his evidence meant that he had an entire day of questions at the inquiry, whereas like lots of other people have much shorter stints. Obviously, Alan Bates's story has been well told, and he's given lots of interviews and he's been campaigning for a long time. So, there were things about it that were familiar, though his testimony was very powerful. But I think there were lots of good details in there that I certainly hadn't heard before. There were the inquiry also was able to get to things like email chains from post office bosses sort of saying, we've got to get rid of Bates, he's unmanageable. When just before he was sacked, there was some things about sort of post office lawyers saying that what they knew and when, and them basically admitting it was a bad PR move, certain things. So I think it was really good to kind of get into some of the detail, and it sets us up for the next I think 2-3 months, where the Post Office inquiry is really going to get to the heart of it now, where there's going to be a number of senior bosses from both the Post Office and Fujitsu, the Japanese company that developed the software that was faulty, basically, the Horizon software. So I think there's a few former chief executives on this week. And then next month, we've got Paula Venables, the former chief executive, who has become a real kind of focal point for a lot of the anger. She's giving evidence for 3 days in May about what she knew. She was chief executive between 2012 and 2019. So she sort of oversaw the point where the Alan Bates and the 554 other postmasters took legal action against the Post Office, and she was in charge when the Post Office decided to contest that legal action. And what's been quite interesting recently is there's been a lot of leaked recordings coming out, letters, that sort of thing, basically suggesting that the Post Office was aware as far back as 2013 that there were problems with the Horizon software, that it was causing issues, that it could be accessed remotely by engineers from Fujitsu's headquarters, which was a key thing that they denied endlessly. And so we're now looking at a situation when Paula Venables is up, did the Post Office knowingly mislead Parliament, mislead government, and engage in legal action when they knew that their arguments were false?
Yeah, and tell people things which ended up being repeated in court, which were just not true. Mike says, is there an expected end date on this inquiry? Will the government be hoping to push any compensation payments onto the next administration? I think in answer to your last question, yes, Mike, yes, because every compensation payment that's floating around at the moment, there's quite a few, is going to be pushed on. The expected end date, I think, is sometime, isn't it, next year, Lizzie?
Yeah, the evidence, the final phase of the inquiry will take evidence in the autumn. So they're sort of estimating it will end, I think it starts in September. So I suspect we may get the report and the recommendations next year.
Yeah, it's a little bit wild. And so one of the things that Alan Bates said, it's described on the front page of the Mirror today, he described the post office as thugs in suits. He said that Post Office Limited has spent the entire period, which is 2 decades, pretty much, at least a decade since Paula Venables was in charge, the entire period denying, lying, defending, attempting to discredit and silence me. And it's the kind of thing that it's affected thousands of people, this case. I don't really know if inspired is the right word, but it's certainly infected with rage millions of others, I think it's safe to say. And today's letters page in the Mirror is a case in point. If you have a copy, I suggest trying to read through some of these. So we've got Steve from Milton Keynes. Am I the only one who's deeply puzzled by the lack of court proceedings against Paula Venables and other senior Post Office and Fujitsu executives? The long-standing, ever-growing dossier of prima facie evidence surely warrants arrests. There's someone from Slough in Berkshire who says, I was watching an interview on BBC Breakfast with Jess Core, a sub-postmistress who was a victim of the Horizon scandal. I thought I couldn't get shocked by revelations anymore, but Jess emotionally revealed on live TV that while she was in hospital suffering with severe trauma and mental health breakdowns directly caused by the Post Office, they sent their own doctors in to find out if she was faking it. That they couldn't even trust the clinical diagnosis of the NHS doctors who were treating her. Ronnie from Norwich says, now documents have proved bosses and lawyers knew of the issues. They should be investigated by the police. I mean, these letters are just a stream of demands from the public, as we've seen as well after the ITV drama, that someone's held to account, that there is this sense, isn't there, that there must have been a crime committed here somewhere because it's so wrong, whether it's perjury, whether it's false accounting. You know, covering your own backside, unfortunately, isn't a criminal offence at the moment. But since this drama was aired and these taped conversations have been leaked, it does seem that someone really knew that the crimes that were being prosecuted by the Post Office itself weren't really... They weren't something that could really be substantiated safely in criminal terms. And, you know, if you could remotely access those computer systems, it would have been possible to reverse engineer the convictions even. Is this, Lizzie, do you think this is going to lead to where people think it should, that it will get to a court case at any point?
I think it's certainly possible. The issue at the moment is everyone's sort of waiting for the inquiry to end, which is good in the sense that it is good for the inquiry to do its job to establish the evidence that it's getting and all of that without the interference, external interference. But a number of MPs that I've spoken to about this, including the Labour MP Kevin Jones, who's been campaigning on this for a long time and sits on the Compensation Advisory Board, they are starting to say, we don't understand why there aren't prosecutions already. Why do we have to wait for the inquiry? This is getting ridiculous. And I think there's some sympathy with that argument. The government says the inquiry needs to finish first and then let's see. But the Post Office Minister, Kevin Hollinrake, has been saying for a while now that he thinks that those guilty should be sent to prison. And the Met Police began an investigation, I think, in 2020, where they are looking at sort of, as far as I understand it, possible offences of fraud and perverting the course of justice. But we don't know a lot about that inquiry and who's actually being looked at. But I suspect if the inquiry finds that, you know, people did know, Post Office bosses did know that the software was faulty and that these prosecutions were unsound, that people should be in court. And I hope that, you know, that the postmasters will get that justice, because I think that's what Alan Bates and so many of them keep saying. You know, the compensation is one thing. Yes, people's lives were ruined, but like people need to be held to account for this. Like the money won't take back the time that people have lost, the damage to their reputations. Lots of people have died without ever having their names cleared. Like somebody needs to, you know, multiple people perhaps need to be held accountable for that.
Yeah. that's the catharsis, isn't it? If there's been an injustice, there has to be a release and a correction, a balance in the other way, some way. But I dare say, if all those people, and I'm sure there are viewers out there saying, yes, there should be people arrested, why aren't they in clink already? If we had that situation, and so let's say Paula Vennell's got arrested for something tomorrow, she wouldn't be giving evidence at the public inquiry, because her lawyers and everything else would just say, well, you can't, because you're going to interfere and significantly affect a future court case. Once criminal proceedings start, they become active. There's some things you can't do in this country, and you have to let justice run its course. So if there's the public inquiry would end up having to go on ice, I suspect, for a while to let convictions and court cases sort of play out. And that would mean people couldn't give evidence to the public inquiry. It would mean any evidence they did give would be sort of extra lawyered and everything else. And so that's probably why the inquiry is heading on before there's any criminal cases, because otherwise, if it was the other way around, we'd be going, well, why can't the inquiry get to the bottom of this? And why is it all on ice just to wait for, 3 years or something for a case to come to court? So this is probably the best way of doing it, even though it's not necessarily perfect. Dare say, well, we'll all be there waiting when the cuffs finally go on somebody. I'm sure they will at some point.